think it is necessary when I say things that wind up not being true to correct the record, and also to hold myself accountable. And I'm kind of loath to do it these days, and here's why. There are a lot of damn dirty liars on the internet on the right who tell you a bunch of stuff that is not true, and then they know the news cycle moves so fast that you're going to move on, they're going to move on, you're going to forget how much they've lied to you. And I don't like to lie to you, and I don't like to get stuff wrong. And occasionally I do. And I think after every election season, it's worth going through and saying, here are the things I got right, here are the things I got wrong. You don't really want to hear the things I got right, though. You want to hear the things I got wrong. And I want to actually go through some of what I said yesterday, but weave it into a larger issue for a related story. So the biggest thing that I got wrong was overstating. I wasn't wrong, but I clearly overstated the collapse in Trump support after the Tony Hinchcliffe event. Now, you should know I was talking to Republican pollsters, not Democratic pollsters, and people close to the Trump campaign, all of whom were freaking out about the Madison Square Garden event. Their level of freak out amplified my view of the direness of the situation, I will say. So I don't just come by this stuff myself. I do talk to other people, Democrats and Republicans, people close to both campaigns, and all of them were like, yeah, this is a real problem. But how much of a problem did it turn out to be? Actually, Donald Trump got 15% more Puerto Rican votes than Kamala Harris votes among early voters, and among those who made up their mind in the last week, 6%. So there clearly was a fall off from 15% plus 15 to plus 6. There was a decline. Everyone saw it in the polling, and everyone just was freaked out about the polling that they were seeing, and I conveyed it to you. So I definitely do think the way I conveyed it got that one wrong. What I did get right, though, is that all the polling benefited Donald Trump. I have told you all year long that I still believe the polls undercounted Trump's support, and you should add 2 to 3 points to every poll for Donald Trump. And sure enough, had you done that, you would have seen the way the entire election was breaking. I also think I got wrong how, and this gets to the larger point I want to get to, this mass male-female divide. Turns out there wasn't a major gender gap. And now there was for men overwhelmingly. And while there was a gender gap for women, it was not as big. I really did, based on 2022, think that abortion really was going to be a primary factor. Turns out it wasn't. And that gets me to the larger issue of right and wrong. I got a lot of stuff right about this election. There are some things that got wrong. Hinchcliffe was one of them. By the way, the turnout game, some of you actually want me to apologize for telling you all along the ground game wasn't good, and your proof is the election result. No, I stand by that one, and I've talked again after the election to people directly involved with the Trump team who say no. What happened was they did not fund a regular ground game effort. They left it to the outside groups. The ones I was worried about, turns out I was right to be worried about them. Elon Musk saved the day, as I told y'all. Elon Musk Group was going to save the day. The Faith and Freedom Coalition was able to get Christian voters out. Americans for Prosperity was able to get economic voters out. The outside groups, though, that the Trump team relied on, disaster. Notice you're not hearing a lot of braggadociousness from those groups because I was right. It turned out to be bad. But what I missed was that what the Trump team was doing by not funding the ground game was they were doing micro-targeting online. Many of you called me in the course of this campaign and said, I see Kamala Harris ads all over when I'm on YouTube. So turns out the Trump team was doing better precision targeting than the Harris team, and they were targeting young men on platforms where those men are and drove them out to vote through non-traditional means. They weren't showing up and knocking on their door like some of those ground game groups were doing. They were actually targeting them through their advertisements on YouTube and the like, and it worked. It worked completely under the radar. It totally worked. That was one of the secret methods that Donald Trump and Mike Johnson, I guess, were talking about, was this online ad spending. And in fact, when you look at the late filed FEC reports, you can see they were doing a lot of spending online that none of the rest of us picked up on. So good for them. But all of these get me to a larger issue. And to that, I want to play for you. This is an NPR reporter on MSNBC. Falkenflick is his last name. Listen to this conversation.
And what's impressive in some ways is the way in which conservative forces have created this alternative media ecosphere that is, in a sense, the mirror image of the, what shall we say, caricature of the legacy and mainstream media that they've presented for all these decades, right? It is much of it intently created and aimed at propping up conservative forces, knocking down liberal either talking points or agendas, and discrediting them in the process in a way that the mainstream media doesn't really think of its motivation. It's not why people at the Washington Post get out of bed to report. It's not why people at Axios go and call sources. But
No. Now, look, I want to stop there, but to go back to the Hinchcliffe moment. Because it wasn't just Republican and Democratic polling showing the shift. Politico, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and other outlets made a massively big deal about it. They echoed the individuals that they talked to in the Democratic Party and gave the story even more weight within the mainstream media, that this really was a big deal. And we know from the exit polling it turned out not to be. Or look at abortion and the gender gap. How much did you hear about the gender gap from the media? Everywhere the media turned, the media reported that sources close to the campaigns were very insistent on a massive, massive gender gap. It was going to be a huge gender gap. And guess what? It turned out not to be so. Yes, there was a gender gap, but there were more men. The shift was bigger for men than for women. Actually, Donald Trump didn't do as bad with women as the media would have you believe. In fact, married women, particularly married white and Hispanic women, benefited Donald Trump. Have you heard that in the media? It's in the exit polling, the same exit polling that showed you all this other stuff. Married women. Remember, now this goes back to 2012 as well. Because in 2012, the media talked about a big gender gap between Obama and Romney, and it turns out married women across the board broke for Mitt Romney. You never heard that in the media. Same thing happened now. But wait, there's an even bigger one. Springfield, Ohio. Springfield, Ohio. The media wants you to know that Donald Trump won Clark County. Clark County is where Springfield is. Donald Trump won Clark County in 2020. Donald Trump won Clark County in 2024. The Washington Post notes, for example, that Trump won Clark County in 2020. But the media assured us that there was a backlash in the community. The media assured us there was a backlash. Now, I knew there wasn't a backlash, and here's how I knew there wasn't a backlash. This is one of the things I was right on, because one of my major markets is WHIO in Dayton, Ohio, which is in Dayton and covers Springfield and Clark County. And we had a whole lot of callers calling us, saying this actually was a problem. No, they weren't eating the dogs. No, they weren't eating the pets, but it was a huge problem. And the American media listening again to Democrats, not the actual people in Springfield, Ohio. The American media seeded a story that this was some disproportionately terrible thing, and Trump was going to risk alienating the people in Ohio. Donald Trump lost Springfield, Ohio to Hillary Clinton in 2016. Donald Trump lost Springfield, Ohio to Joe Biden in 2020. Donald Trump won Springfield, Ohio. Yes, he won Clark County, but you can actually look at the city limits of Springfield, Ohio, and if you did, you'd find he lost it to Clinton. He lost it to Biden. He won it this time, and the media told us it wasn't possible. The media said it was going to be a big backlash. Why? Because the media chose to listen to Democrats and not the people. The media allowed the Democrats to do their thinking for them. Time and time again, and this gets back to this clip from David Folkenflik on NPR. What he can't bring himself to acknowledge, what Stephanie Ruhle, who he's talking to, can't bring herself to acknowledge, what most of MSNBC can't bring itself to acknowledge, what a lot of CNN can't bring itself to acknowledge, is that the Democrats and the press work so much more collaboratively together. The media is conveying to the public an image created by Democrats, not by reality. which is why MSNBC's ratings have fallen so far off the cliff after Election Day. Comcast has announced they're considering selling MSNBC. Why? Because if you watched MSNBC on Election Day, oh, and I did, you were convinced Kamala Harris was going to win. In fact, they wouldn't let Steve Kornacki call any races. Steve Kornacki was dropping major hints to the MSNBC audience, and then they'd go to Rachel Maddow for a race to be called. Oh, she won New Jersey. And no one on MSNBC thought, well, it must be bad for Kamala Harris if at 2 a.m. the day after the election they're calling New Jersey for Harris. That one should have been quick. They're seeding narratives in the press. Here's another one. This is Scott Jennings on CNN.
Not only did people know it, it's overwhelmingly popular. Poll after poll after poll, Americans wanted this policy.
Which policy exactly?
Deportations. And even
mass deportations?
Absolutely. And even Hispanic Americans wanted it. A majority of Hispanic Americans wanted it as well. This is not controversial. Everybody's trying to make this controversial. It's not controversial. A couple things. Number one, presidents always deport people. Barack Obama deported 3 million people. This is not controversial.
Yeah, actually,
and on top of that, one more issue, there's 1.3 to 1.6 million people who've already received deportation orders from a court. They've already gotten due process. That's a good place to start, not controversial.
Okay, and all the people, including the anchor at CNN, act incredulous. Like, how can you say this is popular? Because it's what the exit polling showed. Time and time again on CNN and MSNBC, both networks with massive fall-offs after the election. Part of that is normal after the election. The side that loses gets burnt out and steps away from the press. But this is a disproportionate fall-off compared to past elections. Why? Because at CNN and MSNBC, the overwhelming predominant voices there make you believe mass deportations are not popular. Or there's another story. There's another story here. Where is it? Seth Moulton is a Democratic congressman who came out after the election and said, look, we got to stop supporting boys and girls sports. This is the headline from CBS News' tweet. Representative Seth Moulton is defending controversial remarks that he made about transgender athletes. It's not controversial. 70% of Americans stand with Seth Moulton. It's only controversial in the newsrooms of America where they're overwhelmingly woke. So let's paint the broader picture here. The media listened to Democrats instead of the public and overstated the collapse of Puerto Rican support for Donald Trump after the Tony Hinchcliffe matter. The media listened to Democrats, not the American public, and overstated how much abortion rights was going to matter in the election. The media listened to the Democrats and not the American public on how big a gender gap there was going to be for women. The media listened to Democrats and not the public on transgender issues in sports and thinks it's controversial to believe what 70% of America believes about transgender athletes. The media thinks it's controversial what Donald Trump said about Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, and for the first time ever, he won Springfield, Ohio. The media thinks it's controversial to believe mass deportations are a good thing, and yet a majority of Americans support mass deportations. The media believes that the Republicans have created an alternative media, and they're seeding disinformation and lies. Meanwhile, that's what the mainstream media is doing, declaring things that are controversial to progressives as controversial to Americans. They've confused the plot and they've confused the protagonists and antagonists, and the American public signaled on election night that they're done being lectured by a press hijacked by wokes who tell the American public reality is what progressives want, not what it actually is. And you want to know why nobody trusts the press anymore? That's why.